On the 26th of October, 1555, while sailing to Brazil to establish the first French colony in the Americas, two ships commanded by Nicolas d'Oron de Villegagnon approached Ascension Island, a geologically young volcanic island in the South Atlantic, 7 degrees 57 minutes south of the equator and 14 degrees 22 minutes west of the prime meridian. Ascension is located close to the middle of the Atlantic, around 1,540 kilometers west of Africa and 2,300 kilometers east of South America. The closest land is the island of St. Helena, located 1,130 kilometers to its south. The expedition's almoner, the Franciscan cosmographer André Thevet, recorded his experiences on Ascension in chapter 21 of his book, 1557 book, Les Singularités de la France Antarctique. Thevet wrote that the island was uninhabited, yet named Ascension by the Portuguese explorer João da Nova, who discovered the island on the 30th of April, 1501, that year the Feast of the Ascension. Ever on the hunt for singularities to fill his book of the same name, Thevet was drawn to a large flock of birds, so vast in number as those there were unbelievable to behold. Of these birds, a species of large birds, which I have named Aponar, which have small wings because they cannot fly, has garnered particular attention as a possible example of a penguin living on Ascension before that island's human colonization began in 1815. Uncertainties surrounding the identity of Thevet's Aponar persisted in the 5 centuries since its first sighting, leading to several theories concerning the identity of Thevet's bird. The Comte de Buffon and Jeremy Gaskell thought the Aponar was some species of penguin. However, a newer theory developed in the 21st century, which I can talk more about in the Q&A, claims Thevet was witness to the extinct Ascension night heron. Elsewhere in his Singularité, Thevet acknowledged that such singular things were disappearing from colonized islands in the Americas, particularly on the island of Hispaniola, in their case drawing from Oviedo. The consensus among all who have written to date on Thevet's Aponar is that this is a singular account of a bird which likely no longer exists on Ascension. And the aim then of my presentation is to address Thevet's Aponar as an example of an enigmatic flightless seabird alongside Jacques Cartier's Aponats, the great auk, and the penguins known as geese and described by Antonio Pigafetta and Damião de Gois. By placing Thevet's Aponar in this flock, the Aponar's role as an intermediary demonstrates the ease of misidentification between these North Atlantic and South Atlantic seabirds. The 16th century Portuguese and Spanish voyages of exploration into the South Atlantic and beyond produced the first notable accounts of penguins published in Europe. While it was the later sighting in real time, Antonio Pigafetta's penguin account was the first to be widely circulated in Europe after his return to Seville from the first circumnavigation of the Earth aboard the Victoria on the 6th of September, 1522. In his description of 2 islands in the Strait of Magellan at the bottom of South America, Pigafetta described an island full of geese and sea wolves, writing, "Truly, the great number of these geese cannot be told. In 1 hour, we loaded the 5 ships with them that they had in the fleet." Pigafetta described the geese as black, and all have feathers alike on both body and wings, and they do not fly, and they live on fish. They were so fat that it was necessary to skin them rather than to pluck them. Their beak is like that of a crow. Pigafetta placed these birds on the approach toward the Antarctic pole, and notably paired them with sea wolves, described in Italian as lupi marini, and in French as loup marin. Thevet's annotated copy of Pigafetta's 1526 French translation, published in Paris by Simon de Colline, and today housed in the Bibliothèque Méjeanne in Aix-en-Provence, noted this page's insular setting. The details present in Pigafetta's account of geese near the Antarctic pole do connect to Thevet's own account in his description of the bird, its black feathers and flightlessness, and its corvid beak. Pigafetta's choice to name these birds geese intended to compare their shape and size of their bodies with geese, exclusive of their necks. Even still, the goose comparison had some influence in the 16th century. A similar pairing of seabirds and sea wolves appeared in Damião de Gois's account of Vasco da Gama's first successful voyage around the Cape of Good Hope in his 1566 Crónica do Felicíssimo Rei Dom Emanuel, published in Lisbon. De Gois recorded that da Gama observed on an islet of a bay, or angara in Portuguese, some animals that they call solitários, as big as wild ducks, which cannot fly, as they do not have feathers in their wings. Some, however, have leather covers, like the color and fur of bats. This name, Solitario, appeared also in Fernão Lopes de Castaneda's Historia. In the French translation, which Thevet would have most likely read, Castaneda wrote that along the African coast in the harbor of St. Helena, there are also a manner of birds which they call solitaires, which are as big as geese and do not fly because they lack feathers in their wings and cry like a donkey. This bay is located 140 kilometers northwest of the Cape of Good Hope and in the midst of the African penguin's natural range. This penguin is also known as the Cape penguin and as the jackass penguin because of its cry. Solitario is an alternative name in Portuguese for the African penguin, making this perhaps one of the first published records of an African penguin in the European zoological record, albeit over 50 years after its sighting. Like Picafetta's geese, Castaneda and de Gois's Solitarios were compared to waterfowl and lived alongside sea wolves, though in this instance the more than 3,000 sea wolves were the focus of de Gois's account. Drawing from Picafetta and the Portuguese, the classification of these southern seabirds as geese was prominently included by Carolus Clusius in his 1605 Exoticorum Libri Decem. His account attributed to them the taxon Anser Magellanicus, or Magellanic goose, writing that they could be found in the Austral Sea called the Pacific, where Magellan sailed close to 48 degrees beneath the equator toward the Antarctic pole, whence he found islands copiously populated by these birds where they lay their eggs. Clusius continued, they are called penguins because they are truly insular and are named after the islands where in such abundance they have been observed. The confusion in Thevet's account derives from his use of Aponar to describe this flightlessness in two disparate seabird species from the North and South Atlantic. Thevet wrote later in the same chapter on Ascension that there were similar birds to the Aponar to be found in great quantity on an island in the Cape of Bonne Visite on the coast of the New Land, which is called the island of the Aponar. Paul Gaffrel, the 19th century Thevet scholar, noted that this island of the Aponar referred to an encounter with the great auk during Jacques Cartier's 1534 voyage to Canada, in which the older explorer recorded, "We name here these birds Aponats, Apponatz, which we loaded into our two boats in at least a half hour." Cartier was certainly referring to great auks rather than penguins, owing to this account coming from Funk Island off the northeast coast of Newfoundland in 1534. He described the bird as black and white in a large flock, having beaks like a crow. They are always in the sea, and none among them have ever been seen flying in the air, for they have little wings. For this reason, they are stronger beneath the sea, as other birds are stronger in the air, and these birds are quite fat. The word Aponar appears to be indigenous to Newfoundland or the surrounding regions. While Cartier and Thevet did not provide an etymology for Aponar, several 19th century ornithologists working in Newfoundland came to the same general conclusion, that Aponar, or Aponath, as Richard Hakluyt rendered it in English in his 1589 Principal Navigations of the English Nation, is an indigenous name for the great auk from either the Beothuk or Inuit languages. Giovanni Battista Ramusio recorded this word in his Italian translation of Cartier's account in the 1556 Book 3 of his Navigazioni et Viaggi as Aporath, in a spelling far closer to Hakluyt's than Thevet's later Aponar. Likewise, Thevet's Italian translator Giuseppe Orologi adopted a spelling akin to Ramusio's in his 1561 Historia dell'India America, rendering this bird's name in Italian as Aponarte, perhaps to find a happy medium between Ramusio's and Thevet's spellings. The Aponath spelling provided a distinctive link for the 19th century Scottish naturalist Symington Grieve, who argued that Aponar is either a Beothuk or Inuit word that may be a corruption of the English word harpooner. Contrary to Grieve's ultimately English origins for the word Aponar, his contemporary, the American zoologist Frederick Augustus Lucas, proposed in an 1890 report on his expedition to Funk Island for the Smithsonian that Cartier considered the name Aponath to have originally been applied by the natives to a species of bird, supposedly the great auk. Lucas identified these people as the Beothuk, who were then considered extinct in Newfoundland. Considering that the Aponar never made the leap from Cartier or Thevet's works into the ornithological compendia of Pierre Bellon or Conrad Gessner, It is likely this indigenous etymology was first noticed by British anthropologists seeking to understand the Beothuk relationship with their own natural world in the 19th century. One reason that Thevet's Aponar did not appear in Gessner's work, unlike his sloth and toucan, is because he did not include an illustration of the bird alongside its description, demonstrating that it was of lesser importance to collect. Are we doing on time? Great. Now, to conclude here briefly, with a few minutes to spare, Thevet's Ascension Aponar then was a fitting one to compare to Cartier's Aponats. The cosmographer described the Ascension Aponar as a species of large birds that have small wings because they cannot fly. They are as large and fat as our herons, with white fronts and black backs, with carbon black beaks like a cormorant or a crow. When they are killed, they cry like a pig. Both Cartier's Aponats and Thevet's Aponar shared similar small wings and black dorsal and white belly feathers, corvid beaks, and a larger overall size. By this comparison, it is logical that Thevet would recognize these birds on Ascension Island as the same species which Cartier observed on Funk Island 20 years before. In 1785, Buffon wrote in his entry for the Manchot that the Aponar were one of the reasons for the confusion between the great auk and the penguins. So Manchot is the modern French name for penguins, you can see on the screen. And this is in volume 18 of the Histoire naturelle des oiseaux. He wrote that Thevet's Aponar caused greater taxonomic confusion for later ornithologists because it is under this name of pingouin in French, which it is called Aponar, which were recounted by the ships going from France to Canada. These later Aponar, identified by Cartier, are pingouin, the French name for the great auk. In short, because this name Aponar was first used to describe auks in the North Atlantic, its reuse to describe penguins in the South Atlantic caused unnecessary confusion. Thank you.